So you've committed yourself to the discipline of weightlifting and are hell-bent on learning everything you can on the subject of getting yacked. You've taken inspiration from every source that will give it, from dirtbag bodybuilders and cheating Olympians to violent prison inmates. You've followed the science, read every blog, listened to every pod, and watched every talk. And just when you start to rack up some W's in the gym and think, I know what the fuck I'm doing, bam, you run into a problem where the solution requires doing the exact opposite of everything you've learned. Paradoxes are fucking everywhere. These counterintuitive rules exist in every field, but they're especially present in lifting. So I'm here to point out some of the most common contradictory rules in lifting and shed some light on them. Life is complex enough. The gym should be simple. So let's go. Paradox number 1, slow gains are faster than fast gains. From Jim Wendler's 531 second edition. People always scoff when I want their bench to go up by 20 to 25 pounds their first year. They want the program that will put 40 pounds on their bench in 8 weeks. When they say this, I ask them how much their bench went up in the last year, and they hang their head in shame. All trainees go through periods of exceptional growth, where they walk in every session stronger than they were before. This might go on for months, especially with new lifters, and it will inevitably skew their standards for what good training means. Training is not the pursuit of the next big thing that is going to add 10% to all of your lifts. And the treatment of training as that leads to a chaotic training cycle, where you are happy when everything is going well, and are frustrated, depressed, and desperate when it isn't. Kind of reminds me of dating. Actually, the relating of long-term training to relationships isn't far off. For example, we've been socialized in movies and pop culture to focus on the infatuation phase of relationships, which places the importance of new and exciting stimulus ahead of the boring, workmanlike effort that is required to build a long-term successful relationship. In that way, society's relationship woes are not unlike the woes of training culture at large, where the unsupervised masses bounce impulsively and desperately from program to program without learning what it means to sustain something productive and enduring. Real growth is the kind that compounds month after month, year after year. It happens in the months between those meteoric increases in strength. So if you don't want to die a lonely, gainsless spinster, stop with the frivolity and commit yourself to the boring work. Quick thank you to this channel's sponsors. Barbell Apparel makes the best training gear on the market. Hit the link in the description for 10% off. Also hit the link below that to get to Boost Camp, where you can find my programs and many others absolutely free. You punch in your numbers, you track it on your phone week to week. Super convenient. Thanks to those guys, they make what I do possible. Paradox number 2. The things that build you up are the things that tear you down. This is one of the hardest things for lifters to wrap their heads around. We get so concerned with finding the one thing that will kick us out of the year-long plateau we've been drifting in that we start to see training variables in a false binary. Either this will grow me or this won't grow me. Training methods are more complex than that, and how well you respond to them depends on the balance between the stress that that method delivers and the recovery that it allows for. So the paradox boils down to this. You need a monumental amount of stress to force adaptation, but monumental stresses can prevent adaptation and actually send you backwards. This isn't just in regards to overtraining, which very, very few people actually experience. The truism, fatigue masks fitness, is the shorthand explanation for why strength athletes need to taper their work in order to peak properly. They needed all of the effort and all of the volume through their prep to improve, but if they're working hard enough to grow, they're working hard enough to limit how strong they can be. So when you do find the trick, the thing that starts to grow you again, whether it's adding an extra day of work, whether it's increasing the number of working sets you do, whether it's adding a little bit of weight, know that fatigue debt compounds. And every week that you decide to do harder than last time without some recovery measure to balance it out puts you further and further into the red. Remember, if it's good enough to give you gains, it's good enough to steal them. The good news is that there are 2 super easy workarounds. Thing 1 is to think about your training in chunks, where you start with your split and exercises and a manageable amount of work that gives you room to improve. After 4 weeks or so of linear increases, be it by adding a rep here or a little more weight there, you should be reaching a crescendo, the point where it becomes really challenging but also unsustainable. That is where much of your progress comes from, but that's also where you can fuck yourself up. Once you get through that hardest week of training, where you're not quite sure if you can build off of that next week, reset and build back up. This is an example of a wave approach, and it's used in a lot of popular programs, and with good reason. Workaround number 2 is to simply add in deloads. I recommend this for lifters who can't help but go ham on each session. If you know you're likely to ditch the plan and just go for broke each workout, just make sure that every few weeks has a mandatory reduction in effort. Newer lifters might be able to go hard week after week for 8 weeks or more, where more advanced lifters might need to take a deload every 2nd or 3rd week. For most trainees, deloading every 4th to 5th week is appropriate. Paradox number 3. The best performers are the worst examples. This next quote comes from Mark Ripito. I'm not even using it ironically. This is one of my favorite quotes in regards to authority in lifting, and it's that mediocre athletes that tried like hell to get good are the best coaches. It's logical to think as a fresh, bright-eyed upstart that the fastest ticket to the top is by copying others who are already there. And it's a sound principle. We don't expect students to invent calculus from scratch. We give them the formulas that have already been shown to work. The truth is there's a ton of super valuable information you can pick from the minds of those who have achieved the most in this field. And that can save you years, or in my case, decades. The best methods haven't really changed in the last half century, so I can tell you that you are not better off trying to fucking reinvent the wheel. That being said, individual factors do play a massive role in whether you grow or burn out from a particular type of training, and it turns out the best performers tend to have the biggest cushion in that regard. Yeah, I know, fucking pricks, right? There are hidden factors that tend to insulate these chosen ones from bad programming decisions, including genetics that increase durability, optimize limb lengths, thicken tendons and joints, and cause faster adaptations. The GOATs that we all follow very closely are the ones who have an equal mix of work ethic, opportunity, and this genetic secret sauce. So it is in your best interest to assume that you are not the 1 in 1,000 who won the genetic lottery and decided to take up lifting. The practices of genetically gifted, pharmaceutically enhanced, Olympic caliber hyper performers might not include things that meet your specific needs. And at worst, they will include things that you will actively burn out from. As if that wasn't bad enough, every top performer went through their own journey, and that was not comprised of what you see them doing now on Instagram. Some of the most reckless programs like Smolov and Bulgarian were made specifically as bad programs, meaning they were not meant to be applied to or survived by the average trainee. They were crafted to exploit the durability of the most gifted and enhanced, who could benefit from this shit tsunami of work rather than be ruined by it and thus claim a spot on the podium. But none of these programs were given to the lower tier lifters who are still in the process of getting good. And that same rationale applies to the lifters you see now who are following specific programs that meet their needs as highly advanced, highly trained individuals. They've done all the base work that you should be doing now. So even if your favorite lifter is actually somewhat similar to you, what they did to get out of their intermediate stage is likely very different than what they do now. Those are the years of training you don't see, which is unfortunate given that they are the only years of training that are actually relevant to you. So in regards to finding best practices, that leaves us in a conundrum. Do we look towards the best, who may be genetic outliers and what worked for them or what they got away with doesn't apply to us? Do we look towards mediocre or shitty lifters? That doesn't seem like a really rational way to go about things. The answer is you want to build as much of a consensus across as many data points as possible, because the more people a particular rule or approach applies to, the more likely it's going to apply to you. Now, unfortunately, you're not going to have the ability or the means to carry out that type of study. You're not going to get it just from asking questions from the people around you. You need a bigger scope. So you need to find people who have been in the field, who have distilled this information, and who have come to conclusions on your behalf. And that involves getting a consensus from all of the most accomplished coaches, specifically coaches who have worked with a wide variety of athletes. You don't just want the coaches that work with the pros, you want coaches that have trained novices and intermediates, people who have taken mediocre athletes and helped them get good, specifically people who are mediocre athletes themselves and worked very hard to get good. Now, whether or not the actual coach was themselves a high performer is only a bonus. It does give a little extra something if you have a very good coach who also knows what it's like to exist in that competitive environment. But you don't want to make the mistake of just looking at somebody's high accomplishments for themselves and think that that's enough to defer expertise to them. Now, that in and of itself might sound like a tall order. It's absolutely not. There are a handful of resources that are known for being the most insightful, the most relevant. I strongly recommend picking up Scientific Principles of Training. I strongly recommend picking up Practical Programming. And I actually recommend picking up some of the more relaxed recreational reading from people who are titans in the industry. Josh Bryant has very good information and he's put out a ton of books. Not only does he have a degree and he was mentored by Fred Hatfield, who was a 1,000-pound squatter on top of being a PhD, but Josh has studied extensively everybody from bodybuilders to prison inmates who use very informal methods of getting strong. So in that way, he builds authority by drawing connections between different disciplines. You can also look at Greg Nuckols' work, Stronger by Science. Greg himself is educated and he does a killer job of sifting through the evidence, but he has a ton of practical experience himself, and he never reviews something without applying that direct practical expertise. Very invaluable resource. And also, you found this channel right here, so you guys are already off to a good start. Remember, whenever you're looking at somebody and asking, is this a person I should listen to? Consider how many data points they represent. You're not going to be able to get all these data points under your umbrella by yourself. So you need to look at people that have done that have spent decades coaching, Maybe they have degrees, but have they also competed? Have they coached competitors? How many different arenas do they have authority in? Once you go through enough of them, you're gonna see a pattern of the same principles, the same approaches, the same information being passed around, and that's what you want to stick to. Beyond the foundational stuff, there's a lot of different options, there's a lot of play in the joints, and you will have some room for experimentation. But my recommendation is to take care of the big rocks first, and the little ones will follow. So that's all I've got for today, guys. Let me know what you think. What unique experiences have you had in the process of learning about training? Which things held you up? Which paradoxes did you come across? Leave your experiences in the comments, or better yet, take it to Patreon, where I post daily my training so you can see how I put these concepts into practice in real time. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.